So if we move on to cardiovascular fitness and different types of forms of that, what cardiovascular fitness and exercise is, it can be defined as rhythmic in nature, continuous, uses large muscle groups, under low to moderate tension, can be over an extended period of time depending on the form of cardiovascular fitness we look at. We looked at high intensity interval training and we looked at low intensity steady state training, and can be frequently referred to as aerobic exercise as well. So HIIT training can be a form of cardiovascular fitness, but that would be more anaerobic because we don't use oxygen as much. Whereas low intensity steady state is going to be aerobic because we're using oxygen as an energy source in terms of resynthesizing that ATP. If we look at forms and the guidelines what surround cardiovascular training, the ACSM guidelines to achieve and maintain cardiovascular health and fitness benefits from putting frequency in place of 3 to 5 training days a week. Intensity levels between moderate and vigorous. So when we think about clients that are training and have a goal of increasing CV fitness, we're not going to solely focus on them doing bouts of running for 35 minutes at 160 beats per minute. We're going to vary that because there's going to be different training zones that's going to have different adaptations and physiological benefits. So if we have someone train and do 5 sets of 200 meter sprints with 3 minutes between each one, there's going to be an adaptation to your body for that, which is going to be increasing our ability to use different energy sources to participate in that exercise. And then they might do different bouts of 30 minutes training at 140 beats per minute, but keeping their heart rate between 130 and 140, which can be quite taxing in terms of they can't just run at a set pace or go too fast. They need to be controlling that heart rate to benefit and adapt their body for that length of time. And then if we impose the other principles of fit, time, we can put durations of time. We talked about HIIT training being 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, depending on their level, and then more less intense exercises of 30 minutes or 60 minutes, depending on their heart rate zone that we talk about. And then the type. So cardiovascular fitness doesn't have to be running. It can be cycling, it can be rowing, and it can be swimming. There's different variety of CV equipment and exercises that we can use to increase our cardiovascular fitness. Now, that's not to say that getting on a bicycle and going for a run is going to have the same adaptations for our muscular system as our cardiovascular system, because we're going to apply and focus on different muscles working. So if we get on a bike, we're going to solely use a lot more lower limb based exercise and modalities to get through that training. Whereas if we go for a run, we're going to be using the whole body, including the trunk, in terms of rotating, pumping our arms around. So there's going to be different impactful and there's going to be different consequences. Running has a high impact rate in terms of the floor to your feet. Cycling has a less impact, but it's still putting your body through that motion. Swimming has the least amount of impact because you're almost in a state of free movement. So if we look at the adaptations our body takes to that cardiovascular exercise in terms of the cardiovascular fitness that we're working on, our heart is our cardiac muscle. It is a muscle that pumps, okay? We don't have any control of it. It's involuntary. It's going to pump oxygenated blood. It's going to pump deoxygenated blood into it to then re-oxygenate it to then get it round to those working muscles. Now, a response to cardiovascular exercise is the short-term response is heart rate is going to increase. Now, over time, if we continue to apply ourselves in this cardiovascular exercise, our heart is going to have more stimulus to then grow. It is a muscle, so then it's going to apply cardiac hypertrophy. Those ventricles and those valves are going to get bigger, the muscle's going to get stronger, the muscle wall's going to get stronger, it's going to be able to pump more blood around at a more efficient rate. Okay, so along with that cardiac muscle increasing in size and becoming more efficient, it improves the response to overload. So if you then apply 30 minutes one week to an exercise and then apply 40 minutes to the next one, you're applying those principles of progressive overload just to a different component of fitness in terms of cardiovascular fitness. You're going to have to improve physiologically to adapt to those, so your body becomes better at responding to that overload. It knows it's coming, it's going to respond in a positive way. Now, with our heart rate continually increasing, our muscle gets stronger. So what's going to have another effect in terms of adapting physiologically is our resting heart rate is going to be lower, because our body is becoming more efficient at running with less oxygen and more blood around the body. So your heart's not going to have to pump as many times, because it's pumping more blood for less beats. With your heart rate getting a lot more efficient, your wall of your heart getting a lot stronger, it reduces the risk of coronary heart disease. So cardiovascular fitness should always be a part of someone's training regime, whether it is part of their warm-up, part of their cool-down, and then intermittent little periods, because it's going to have so much benefits to their health generally, and not just to fit a goal of getting bigger, hypertrophy and all those. Applying it to aid your general health is a massive plus and bonus of cardiovascular fitness. Now, if we look at the heart rate training zones and how we utilize those to focus cardiovascular fitness training and exercise, and we use that case study of our runner. And if we're going to think our runner of 24 years old, and their aim is to increase their cardiovascular fitness to go and run an Ironman or a marathon, we're going to have to put them through those training zones, because over a period of time of that long distance running, their heart rate is going to rise as an adaptation and response to that increased overload and duration of the amount of time that they're going to be running. So if you train them at a higher rate of heart rate, because then your body's going to then be able to respond and get more efficient at working at that heart rate when it needs to, when you're in that marathon, as well as running at a lower heart rate, so your body becomes more efficient at running and exercising and using those deoxygenated blood for the purpose of what they're used for within that exercise. So in line with cardiovascular fitness, we look at how we train our heart rate. Okay, so our heart rate comes in different zones, and we know that because we've looked at that in different segments of this course. Within this part of the course and how we train cardiovascular fitness in terms of our heart rate zones, we look at 4 key areas. Moderate aerobic zone, which is 50% of your max heart rate, mainly for untrained sedentary individuals and realistic first step into training cardiovascular fitness, because then it allows them to get that adaptation but not be subjected to so much of the consequence of overtraining and pushing themselves too hard. The fitness zone is our second zone, 60 to 70% of your max heart rate, which is considered the fat burning zone, suitable for most individuals and the next step in intensity to allow our cardiovascular fitness to increase. The next zone after that is the performance zone. This is where your heart rate will increase in sort of game scenarios, football, competitive situations, and you can train that through cardiovascular fitness in terms of 70 to 80% of your max heart rate. It improves cardiovascular fitness aerobically and it adapts your body to be able to facilitate that level of competition in terms of our performance. And then our last training zone is performance anaerobic zone, and that's 80 to 90% of your max heart rate. So that's quite a high level for very well-trained individuals to increase speed, pace and performance. But then if we look at that anaerobic zone, we talk about the reduced amount of aerobic oxygen use. So our bodies aren't going to use oxygen as an energy source to facilitate the resynthesis of ATP. We're going to use anaerobic glycolysis in terms of the glycogen that's stored in our muscles, phosphocreatine for a short amount of time with any exercise that happens. We use the ATP that is already stored in our muscles, and then the alactic acid system, which is the byproduct, which is then resynthesized through the diffusion and use of different molecules from ATP itself. So a really good way to measure that exercise intensity is to know what your heart rate actually is. And there's different forms of ways you can do that. So an easy way to do that is to buy a heart rate monitor and just wrap it around you. A lot of exercise watches have them these days. Some of them can be questionable in how reliable they will be in terms of giving you accurate data. So just be wary of that. But if we look back into old-fashioned times of how to do that in a scientific way, just heart rate, follow your thumb down into where you feel a pulse, count that for 30 seconds, times it by 2, that's your heart rate within 1 minute. Okay, same thing for your neck. If you follow your eardrum down to your neck, you'll find a pulse, and that's exactly the same as what you would do for your wrist. Now, to define what your maximum heart rate is to get to those zones, there are different equations that you can use to find it specifically, but we're going to focus on what you need for the purpose of this course, and that is your maximum heart rate would be 220, take away your age. That would define what your heart rate would be as a maximum, and then you can work out the percentage of 90%, 70 to 90% being that performance anaerobic zone, and so on. When we think about our exercise exertion and intensity, we need to look at ways of measuring that. So we need to measure the intensity levels in terms of how our client feels. And one of the ways we can do that is through the 6 to 20 Borg scale. Okay, so the Borg scale runs at 6 to 20 as a level of ease to difficultiness. It says 6 is classed as no exertion at all, so you're not really doing anything, and then it gradually gets more and more. So if we look at number 13 on the scale would be somewhat hard, 15 quite hard, 17 would be very hard, and if you get to 19, 20, you're going at maximal exertion and effort. So moving through cardiovascular training as a focus, we're going to look at the short-term effects of that into a little bit more depth. So when we get involved in cardiovascular training, however we do it in terms of low intensity or higher intensity, using those scales of methods to measure that, we do that, and we want to reap the benefits of that. So short-term effects for our clients we're going to see is heart rate, blood flow, concentration of CO2 in the blood will increase, which will also then increase our breathing rate. If we go through systems of doing that for a longer period of time, your body will then adapt. As we were saying before, our body's going to adapt to the stimulus that you put through it, whether it's musculatory or it's cardiovasculatory in terms of cardiac hypertrophy and the way blood is moved around the body. So the long-term adaptations to that would be the lungs. They increase in capacity. They're allowing more oxygen to come into them, making that they can have more volume within them. The blood increases the transport of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, which also allows for vitamins and minerals to go around to the body when it needs them. If we look at the heart, we talked about cardiac output, so the amount of oxygenated blood being pumped in and out. The muscle gets larger and the walls get thicker through cardiac hypertrophy. And then last, we look at blood capillaries. So the systematic way of blood flowing through in the veins, in the capillaries, through to muscles, into the skin, and all the organs where the blood will be needed. Those capillaries will expand and they will grow in size, and they will just multiply. So the number of capillaries that we have will increase, which will cause an increase in gaseous exchange and exchange of nutrients and oxygen through those capillaries when it's going through the body. Cardiovascular training, if we look at how it affects individual people. So us as people are all individual, whether it's age, gender, our physical circumstances in terms of the somatotypes we look at, if we're obese or if we're slim, or if we've got more muscle mass. There's going to be differentiations between how much blood is needed for the working muscles, how much nutrients is needed for those muscles, and to supply those organs to the body. So cardiovascular training has an effect on those special populations, such as children. So children need to work harder than adults to meet oxygen requirements. They've got smaller lungs. Their heart is going to be smaller because it's less developed. So the heart's going to be working at a higher rate to allowing the blood flow to go around the body. Children also develop a larger amount of energy to supply those muscles to work. So we talk about ATP being the only contractible molecule that is used, and then resynthesizing that as fuel is then used as an energy source. Our bodies as children allow for more energy to be able to be supplied to recreate and resynthesize that ATP. If we move on into pregnancy and pregnant women, we look at low to moderate intensities being the best form of exercise for them, probably because pregnancy, you don't want to be going through high intensity parts of exercise. It's going to cause a lot of strain on the pregnancy, the baby, the body's fundamentals in terms of the organs that are in use, the blood flow around the body. It's got to think about 2 people within 1. Pregnant people always have an issue in terms of regulating their temperature, so thermogenesis. So they can always get like hot flush, get parts of being cold. So that's temperature imbalances. And then their breathing, because the oxygen is needed and that blood flow is needed for more than one individual to survive and grow, their breathing rate will increase a lot more. So they're not going to be able to have that exercise output to an extreme level of what they would have done if they were not pregnant. So if we move on to different age groups, other than children, the older we get, we have an increase in fatigue, lactic acid tolerance. So the older we get, our bodies have been through that system of doing more exercise. We know what it's like. Your body grows and adapts to that. It knows what it feels when you get that lactic acid buildup. So it becomes intolerant and fatigued to different levels of it. So we have age-related issues in terms of our health when we go to the GP, or we have issues that come up because of our joints, like blood pressure issues, blood and dizziness, and we have little blood clots, and people have issues with that because of their age and the way they've lived.